just want you to come in.
Wonderland by Great 78.
Where you hiding? I just want you to come in.
Summary. She's not here. He longs for her. He's unreachable. She's reaching anyway. Inspired by the Elvis Drew and AVIVIAN song, Where Are You? Content warning. Real-world historical attack is vaguely referenced. Draco. Today's her birthday, September 19th. The vase of lush cabbage roses on the table was arranged just so to find the best angle. The delicate petals vibrated with 1,000 colours, all exquisite shades of blush and periwinkle, hues she loved together. Everything in the house needed to be perfect because today might be the day he finally saw her again. Hopefully today she would come to him, to this Wonderland, created especially for them. He took in the dim but richly decorated room. Cool, soft neutrals, warm gold accents, the occasional bit of rich, deep color. Amethyst, garnet, ruby, sapphire. He hoped she would like it. Hopefully soon he'd find out. Possibly today. He'd come here after the war ended. It was the perfect place for her. Well, for them, really. Here they could start their lives together, fresh and new, without the stigma of the past to follow them. A clock chimed in another room. 4. He checked the window. No responding owl. He sighed, picking up a drink that an elf must have helpfully made for him. No, wait, she wouldn't want house elves. He must have fixed this for himself and forgotten. He smiled to himself, abashed at this little slip, even in his solitude. Another chime. 6. He shook his head slightly to clear his mind. He must have fallen asleep again. He'd lost 2 hours. The window was darker now. Still no owl. "Where are you, Hermione?" he asked the emptiness around him. "Where are you hiding?" The war had ended for Draco several years before. Christmas night, 1996 to be exact, though for everyone else it had raged on for far longer. Hermione had also stayed behind at Hogwarts for the holidays that year. Both of them thought they wanted to be alone that Christmas. Both of them had been wrong. She found him that night, on the astronomy tower, wind whipping his blonde hair, his wand dropped to the ground, one leg swung over the crenellations, contemplating what would happen if he put both legs over, if he just let go of all of this bullshit, this task of killing Dumbledore. She'd dragged him back from the parapet and thrown him to the ground, yelled at him for his stupidity, slapped him across the face, just like in 3rd year, for good measure. Then she'd thrown herself onto him as he lay panting on the stone floor. She hugged him as though he was worth something to her. To someone like Draco, who'd felt trapped in a place in life where nothing was worth anything. It felt beyond glorious. He'd tormented this witch for years because he knew he'd never be good enough for her. He had thought, hoped, during all those years that by bringing her down a bit, she might be willing to stoop to his level at some far-flung mythical point in the future. And now she was kneeling next to him, begging him not to go, holding his hand and kissing him. For the first time in nearly 2 years, Draco felt alive. seen. He reached up like a drowning man clutching a life-preserver to touch her waist under her jumper. Her skin was velvet under his chewed-up fingertips. Her frantic and worried whispers, her concern for his life, spread like a soothing balm in his mind that had heard nothing but refrains of doubt and self-loathing for so long. Then she had her arms around him, and he rolled her onto the ground beneath him, cradling her gently. Their kisses deepened, and though he had no right to ask for more from her, he did. And like a savior granting him sanctuary, she gave him more. Everything. He knew he wasn't her first, just as she was not his. But those moments, shared at the top of the astronomy tower, and all the ones in the months that came after, they lived in his mind, cropping up as ubiquitously as dandelions after a windstorm. The memories of their moments together were tethered in his psyche by the smell of her gardenia perfume, by the feel of her warm, pliant body stretching around his girth, by her soft cries of pleasure under him. Their bodies had moved together that night, meeting in harmony and desire as they both sought that moment of shared release. And then he'd looked down into her beautiful copper eyes, still shining with unshed tears, tears for him. The very second their eyes met, he could not help himself. As a born legilimens, he'd learned years before to automatically hide his thoughts with occlumency. Now, caught up in the rapture of sheer bliss with this witch, his thoughts could not be stifled. In an instant they were echoing within her mind, too.
I love you. I've wanted this forever. I'll give you all I can.
Her eyes widened in shock. Then she smiled joyfully up at him, her tears dripping down the sides of her face. And Salazar help him if that wasn't the exact moment that the war had ended for Draco Malfoy. They spent the next few months together in secret. For all of their years in school together prior to 6th year, he'd privately wondered about the Muggle world from which she'd come. Now, finally, he was learning. She taught him all sorts of things about life beyond the magical realm. It sounded like a different planet or a distant moon to Draco. Wondrous, full of magic all its own. He wanted to see it for himself. He dreamed of them seeing it together. Then, too soon, came that other fateful night spent atop the astronomy tower. This one would not end happily for anyone, he knew. He had failed, as he'd expected he would. It did not matter that the deed was done. His failure was the only thing that mattered for him. The next year or so had been a blur for Draco. Brief flashes of pain and heartache, both his own and that of other people around him. None of it sank very deeply into his psyche. Until one day, the pain very much did sink in, deep inside, and with it, Draco sank as well. Further into his own mind he retreated. After that, he felt and heard nearly nothing. And then, miraculously, word came that it was all over. Voldemort was dead. Harry Potter had defeated him somehow, but she was still lost to him. Where are you, Hermione? There had been talk, whispers of a curse so awful, so heinous, it would make one believe that their absolute worst nightmares were real. Hermione must have been spelled with it before the war ended, and now she lived in perpetual fear, convinced that the war was ongoing, convinced that she needed to continue the fight against his side, against him. He'd tried to write letters to her, attempted to apparate to her side, to end the curse. He appealed to their friends for help. He even tried to run adverts in the Daily Prophet and on Wizarding Wireless for Salazar's sake. But the adverts went unpublished and unplayed. Their friends only shrugged, saying, "What can we do?" He would try to turn on the spot, but stay resolutely where he'd started. And the owls never came back. The war had ended years ago, but did Hermione know that? He sighed and placed his drink on the low table in front of the sofa. It was darker now, twilight. He felt drowsy. Most nights he didn't bite sleep, because he always dreamed of her. In his dreams he felt closer to her. He could hear her voice begging him to come back for her, asking him to be with her. "Where are you hiding? I just want you to come in," he would tell her in his dreams. Hermione would answer, "I'm here. Just grab my hand." "Where are you?" Draco would demand. "I love you. I've wanted this forever. I'm giving all I can to find you." And she would echo his words back to him. "I'm giving all I can to find you." His dreams of her both haunted him and held him up, hoisting his head above the hurts and heartaches that dragged him down. But tonight was her birthday, and he was the one making the wish. He only had to hope that somehow, some part of her knew that he was here, waiting for her. Hermione. Once upon a time, they had something special. She'd like to hope they still did, still might have that in the future. She had felt a connection with Draco for some time before that night on the astronomy tower, the Christmas of their 6th year. But on that night, she heard his feelings in his own words inside her mind. Leading up to that night, in the middle of their 6th year, he seldom bullied her any more. Seldom said much to anyone that year, really. His quiet but intense stares at her across the classroom and the library and the great hall said plenty, though. His fierce gaze had, over time, morphed from heated to, well, hot. Hermione knew that he liked her, and somehow the knowledge had not repulsed her. Instead, against her better judgment, it drew her to him. The months leading up to Christmas that year had been lonesome for her. Harry had been wrapped up in Quidditch and girls and lessons with Dumbledore. Ron had been wrapped up in lavender. And more, Hermione found herself alone in the library. His regular table was not very far from hers, and it was obvious that his 6th year was going just as badly as hers so far. Maybe worse. They seldom spoke at first, but by early October they were comparing class notes. By mid-November they were revising each other's essays, and by December they were actually talking, not just about school, but about their lives. Each of them echoed the other's thoughts, that they were racing towards the precipice of adulthood far too fast. Some days they felt ready. Others they wished they could turn back the hands of time. Both of them were afraid of the future, but where she had been hopeful, he was mired in despair. She saw their order as future victors. He only pictured the miserable hate on 1 billion faces, the harrowing fate of 100 deaths at his future hands. So when he said he was staying for the holiday, she changed her plans at the last minute to do the same. And thank Godric she had. When she threw open the door to the tower platform, he'd been straddling one crinol, fingers gripping tightly to the merlin in front of him, high at the top of the astronomy tower. He'd looked back at her with such wide, pleading eyes. She'd pulled him back, using every ounce of strength and all of the magic she possessed. She screamed at him for nearly abandoning her, tears lashing at her cheeks. And suddenly, in the shock of almost losing him, she was kissing him. Before her mortification could carry her away, however, he was kissing her back, eagerly. His tongue moved against hers, his own tears shining in his silver eyes as he rolled them over. And then those unspoken words passed between them, echoing through his legitimacy.
I love you. I've wanted this forever. I'll give you all I can.
His hands caressed her so lovingly, touched her worshipfully, as though she were upon an altar. Their kisses grew more intense, and his mouth travelled down, down. She pulled off her jumper and unbuttoned her blouse, even as he did the same for his own clothes, and suddenly his mouth was kissing down her body, sending rivulets of pleasure through her. She could not help it. She arched into him, running her hands along his lean, muscled arms, feathering along his pale, unblemished chest, ghosting around the raised brand on his arm that she denied was there for so long, despite being almost certain that it was. Her body positively ached, clenching around nothing as his leg pushed between her thighs. And now that she drew herself closer, she could feel exactly how much he wanted her, his rigid length pressing against her own center. The thoughts he'd had echoed in her mind again.
I love you. I've wanted this forever. I'll give you all I can.
A radiant, involuntary smile broke over her face. She was giddy with the knowledge of his love for her, matching her feelings for him. His hand travelled up the outside of her thigh now. May I touch you? His words were whispered against her. Yes, she answered, relishing the feel of his fingers as they touched her softly at first, then more insistently, eagerly. Fuck, Hermione, you're so amazing, love, he'd said raggedly, as he discovered exactly how much she wanted him as well. Her own hands pushed at his trousers before she finally remembered that she knew magic. Grabbing up her wand, she murmured, Alohomora. No longer confined by trousers and pants, he rubbed against her, his lower lip caught between his teeth, damp blonde hair falling into his eyes as he sought the friction that would finally end his torment. Can we... may I... he asked hesitantly, his breath shallow, fearing rejection. Yes, gods, yes, she agreed, reaching down to center him against her. When he pushed inside, gently but insistently, pleasure burst through her like rays of sunshine through a dark cloud. The couple of other times with other wizards, it had never felt like this, she thought. Their eyes met, and she heard the whispers of adoration dropping from his lips, from his thoughts. She knew she was done for.
I love you. I've wanted this forever. I'll give you all I can.
In the early months of 1997, they'd spent many evenings in each other's arms, either in the room of requirement or atop the astronomy tower. They'd made love, or sometimes just held each other close. He would talk of the house that he would buy her when the war was over. Their Wonderland, he called it. A beautiful house in the Muggle world overlooking a forest and a lake with tall windows and brightly polished wooden floors and crown moulding. She would giggle at his specificity, asking exactly how tall was this crown moulding, and what colour were the drapes, and which shade of cream for the walls. He would flash his silver eyes and smile, and describe it perfectly for her. Simple cream, with pops of rich, jewel-tone hues. She would lie against him, looking up to catch the expression of wonder. When his silver eyes met her copper ones, she could see it all perfectly as well. It was a wonderland, she thought. But 6 months after that first Christmas night together, when Dumbledore was killed, she feared that everything was lost. She knew he'd been given an impossible task. She had seen the unwanted mark during their times together, had encouraged him to run away whilst there was still time. But he believed that he had to do it. He knew that his family and friends were in danger if he did not at least try. The impossible task, it turned out, was exactly that. Impossible. For him, at least. And whilst the heinous act was done, it had not been done by him. Harry had told her that he had lowered his wand against the headmaster, and that had made all the difference in her memories surrounding him for the next 4 years. Draco. After he had been crucioed by Voldemort and Bellatrix to within an inch of his life, it was only his mother's sacrifice, putting herself between her son and the wands of the Dark Lord and her own sister, that had saved him from an excruciating death right then. But once it was over, he wasn't the same. He'd speak only a word or two at a time. He was barely awake most days. He did not turn his head when his name was called, did not eat until forced to by an elf or his mother. His legitimacy was dulled, unable to penetrate the fog that engulfed him. And then, around Easter of 1998, he took a steep turn for the worse. Hermione was there, in his house, but she wasn't safe, and he was nearly powerless to help. Her presence sent him spiraling into an abyss, frozen in a battle between fight and flight. He struggled within his own mind, trying to force himself to move, to speak, to do anything to help her. He thrashed against his own traitorous body and tongue, still trapped in the chain-like effects of the Crucio. Then Hermione, with his evil aunt's arms wrapped around her, a sharp dagger held to her throat. It was his last clear memory of her. But he knew she was alive, somehow. He knew the war was over. But why did Hermione not know it? Why didn't she come back to him? Hermione. After the war ended, after Voldemort's body had been burned, and the Elder Wand had repaired Harry's wand, and the school had been rebuilt, Hermione's thoughts turned to Draco. She had been worried for him for many months. When they'd been captured and brought to the manor, he'd seemed a shell of his former self. He'd barely spoken, hardly looked at anyone, did not seem to recognize anything around him. When Harry had taken Draco's wand from his grip, it had barely seemed to register for him. He had not been a part of the final battle. He had not returned for 8th year, in September of 1998. When questioned by the newspapers, Draco's parents only said that he was not strong enough to stand trial. Therefore he was tried in absentia and sentenced to house arrest for 3 years, alongside his mother. After finishing at Hogwarts in the summer of 1999, Hermione returned to Malfoy Manor to find him. Lucius had been in Azkaban for nearly a year, whilst Narcissa was weakened from the war, physically and mentally. Both were mum about Draco. Was he really holed up in there, a recluse who refused to speak in his own defense at his trial? But what she found shocked her. Draco was there, at least physically. The Malfoy elves did what they could, asking him to wake up, sustaining him with potions and their own magic. But he could not speak, and barely opened his eyes at all. Horrified, Hermione had taken him by flu directly to St. Mungo's. He stayed there for 1 year, undergoing test after test. Nothing made a difference. When she and his friends, and occasionally even her friends, stopped by, he might sometimes stir, but he still did not speak. Hermione studied legilimency, knowing it might be the only way to bring him back. But it required voluntarily maintaining eye contact, and Draco would not open his eyes for more than a second or two at a time. All throughout the year 2000, Hermione made plans. He could not wake back up at the manor, she knew. That was where he'd been tortured, where he'd almost died, where he'd almost watched her die. She needed somewhere else to bring him. They needed a Wonderland. She made it her mission to find it. It took the better part of 1 year, viewing home after home. She would walk in, seeing the small windows overlooking a car park or another building, and would walk back out again. Every evening she would return to the hospital and tell him about it. "I went to a new place today. It isn't the right place. It just won't do. I'm going to keep searching." Then, one day in November of 2000, Hermione entered the house. She recognized it immediately, taking in the tall crown molding and the gleaming, immaculate wood floors. Throwing open the drapes that covered the large windows, she knew she would find a pristine forest next to a lake. It was their house. She could not wait to bring him here. Their Wonderland. She spent the first months of 2001 getting it ready. Paint, furniture, everything had to be new. Creamy neutral walls, accented by sparks of deep jewel-tone colors, just the way he'd described, just the way he'd shown her in his mind. It took every bit of her savings, $1 million left to her by her Canadian grandparents, to make it perfect. Every night at St. Mungo's she would tell him about it, and she could feel him trying to move closer to her in his mind, but he was still so far away. By summer of 2001, the house was ready. She, likewise, felt ready. She had practiced legilimency and felt nearly perfect at it. She only needed for him to open his eyes and let her in. The medical staff at St. Mungo's gladly handed over his care to her. They could do no more for him, that much was clear. And so now, for the last 2 months, she had him to herself, waiting. But so far, she'd waited in vain. Today was September 19th, 2001. Her birthday, even if it felt a bit like an afterthought. There was a light tapping at the window, and she hurried to allow in the lovely russet owl that waited patiently on the windowsill. Throwing open the sash to the late summer afternoon, she took a beautiful bouquet from the owl, repaying his efforts in owl treats and kindly head-scratches. Sighing with a sad smile, she turned back to the room, summoning a vase from the kitchen and filling it with water from her wand. She placed the beautiful bouquet of blush and periwinkle cabbage roses in the center of the table, turning it to find the perfect angle. There. If he happened to open his eyes, he would see them there. She did not bother to look for a card. Both Theo and Hermione knew that if Draco could send flowers for her birthday, he would. The clock in the foyer chimed 4. "Would you like me to fix you a drink, love?" she asked him softly. He stirred briefly on the sofa, startling slightly at the sound of her voice. She wondered where he was right now, in his mind. If only he would open his eyes to show her. She left the drink on the table in front of him, knowing that it would go untouched. Stepping out of the room, she called Narcissa with an update. No change today. The same as yesterday, and the week before, and the month before that, and the year before then. Every morning for the past 2 months, she had helped him sit up from bed, transfiguring his pajamas into a finely tailored suit. She read the newspaper to him, described her breakfast, then her lunch to him, and gave him the necessary potions to nourish him. She helped him walk, stilted and hesitant, from room to room. On many evenings, she would play the wireless for him, listening to Quidditch matches and quiz shows and Muggle news programs. Occasionally he would open his eyes. He would look at her with such intensity that she thought he might be seeing her, but each time would only last for a few seconds before the moment passed. He would mumble words, incoherent half-phrases. "Where? Hide. No. 6. Elf." None of it made any sense together. Draco. That was odd, he thought. A moment ago, it had seemed as though the world outside had been getting dark, but now the lovely, calm room in the house seemed suffused with golden light. That scent. He knew it, though he had not smelled it so clearly since his time with Hermione, before the horrible task, in those stolen moments together during happier times. Now it crowded his senses deliciously, and he took great deep breaths of it, filling himself with the perfume so much like gardenias. There was a sound to his right, a shushing, crackling noise. He knew what that was. A wireless. He focused, concentrating very hard on the sound, willing it to bend to his wishes, to help him find her. Hermione. Up until about a week ago, she had felt fine, sharing the headlines of the day with him. She'd talk to him about the news, speculate on world events to fill the silence. But last week, all of that had changed. Now, the news was nothing but horrible. It brought up far too many bad feelings and memories within her. Still, she switched on the wireless, hopefully. "Efforts in New York continue today in the search for survivors within the rubble of the—" No! She couldn't face it tonight. As horrible as it felt to want to celebrate, it was her 22nd birthday, she thought. Was it so wrong to put on a nice dress and a bit of her favourite gardenia perfume, the fragrance she hadn't felt up to wearing for so long, and to spend the evening with the man she loved? Surely they deserved a few moments of peace. "Let's see if we can find something else, love," she said, choking back her tears to force brightness into her voice. She used her wand to twirl the wireless dial, and was surprised to see Draco's face turned towards the sound of the static. "Draco?" He seemed to be concentrating, seeing something to which she was not privy, behind his own eyelids. The wireless dial stopped moving of its own accord. Music streamed from the small speaker, its volume filling the space with its unfamiliarity. Hermione frowned. She didn't recognize this tune. "Draco, do you know this?" She turned back to him to ask, but suddenly she was struck mute, mouth falling slack. She gasped. He had turned back to her. His eyes were open, their silver intensity staring into hers, unblinking. His eyes were hopeful, his lips trying for a smile, as though it had been so long that he'd forgotten how. And just as the words of the song were being sung on the wireless, so they were being spoken inside her head, in his voice.
I've been trying to figure out, where are you from? What are you talking about? Is it the moon? Is it Earth? Is it a place where nothing is worth? $1 million, 1,000 colors, 1 billion faces, 100 death cases. Is it there, or is it here? Where are you hiding? I just want you to come in. Nothing can compare to the love we have, my dear. Just grab my hand and let me take you to my Wonderland, giving all I can to find you.
"Draco," she whispered, standing up and moving towards him. She knelt beside him, their eyes never leaving each other, her copper sustained by his unwavering silver. "Hermione," he said, in a voice strained with disuse. "Thank goodness, love. I found you." Then she was crying, smiling, holding him in her arms, basking in the feel of his arms around her, for the first time in more than 4 years. He gripped her hard, his hands tangling in her hair, his face buried in her neck, breathing in her lovely gardenia scent deeply as he kissed her with years of pent-up longing. He was back, she thought, with a giddy sense of hope. "Yes, Draco, you found me. I found you, too," she said, tears running down her cheeks as she held him close. They'd found each other, right there in Wonderland.
Nothing can compare to the life we had. My dear, just grab my hand and let me take you to my Wonderland. $1 million, 1,000 colors, 1 billion faces, 100 death cases. Is it there, or is it here? Where you hiding? I just want you to come in.
Thank you for listening to Wonderland by Great78. If you enjoyed the story, please find me on Archive of Our Own under Great78, or you can subscribe to my podcast, Silver